pleasure to introduce Alicia Svigals and Donald Sosin, both of whom I'm fortunate to be able to say I've known for some time. They created, that is, composed and performed the live score for The Ancient Law, which most of you saw last night. It's the product of their first collaboration, right? But along with it, they are now on a West Coast tour with two more films for which they've since created scores: the 1924 City Without Jews and the brilliant late 20th century silent The Man Without a World by filmmaker and conceptual artist Eleanor Antin, who I'm honored to say is a mentor of mine. Alicia, as many of you know, is hands down the leading fiddle player of the klezmer revival. She was a founding member of the Klezmatics and has not only performed with Yitzhak Perlman, but coached him, no, taught Yitzhak Perlman how to play in the klezmer style. I don't want to typecast her as only a fiddler, though, because she began with sophisticated training as a violinist in the broader sense. And you can certainly hear that in her film scores, along with all her skill in Yiddish vernacular styles. Recipient of an honorary doctorate from the Jewish Theological Seminary, Alicia has worked composing and performing with playwrights and poets and a veritable who's who of contemporary Jewish musicians. She is also, I can personally attest, exceedingly and cheerfully generous in sharing with colleagues. Before collaborating with Donald Sosin, she created a score for another silent film, The Yellow Ticket, starring the mysterious Pola Negre. It was Alicia's only such film score up to then, but it created a real stir. Donald, on the other hand, has been composing and performing scores for silent films for 50 years, beginning, if I'm not mistaken, when he was an undergraduate at University of Michigan. Since then, besides all sorts of other work, composing, arranging, transcribing, he is what we actually call an unusually complete musician. Besides all that, he has created an international reputation as probably the most accomplished silent film performer, and that is not hyperbole. His list of credits goes on, but just as an example, he's been playing for the silent films at New York City's Museum of Modern Art since the 1970s. His experience with Jewish content films also goes far back with performances in association with the National Center for Jewish Film. Beyond his keyboard skills, which are considerable, he has a phenomenal memory, and according to a mutual friend of ours who's known Donald since high school, and whose mother directed Donald to me sometime in the early or mid-1980s, I can't tell you exactly which year, but we played music together. That mutual friend told me Donald has perfect pitch, okay? But you wouldn't need insider information to determine that once you've heard the pitch-perfect bricolage he assembles before your very eyes and ears. So, Alicia Svigals and Donald Sosin.
Thank you, Ron, for that very generous introduction. And good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, I'm presuming that almost everybody here heard the performance last night, which was extraordinary.
Thank you.
It was just wonderful. I'm kicking myself because I meant to make a mental note of when it switched from accordion to piano in the first act. And,
you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, because it'll give some compositional insight. How you did it?
Yeah, so if you weren't there, it starts in a shtetl, and the main character, Baruch, is the son of the rabbi, who is a very fearsome character. And when they go out to celebrate Purim, Baruch puts on a fake beard and becomes Ahasuerus. And then the revelry goes back to their house, and when the rabbi sees Baruch in the beard, he rips it off. And at that point, the piano kicks in, because it's emblematic of Baruch's change of mind, that he's decided he wants to leave the shtetl and become an actor out in the wider world. The accordion comes back a couple of times, once in a little Gaststätte, and then later on, very late in the film, when there's, the rabbi is just going through this mental anguish and transformation, and the sun is coming up early in the morning, and there's a little bit of accordion there, and also when the traveling schnorrer is talking about how things have been, he's talking to Baruch about how things have been at home while he's been away in Vienna. There's also some accordion. So it has to do with the shtetl, and then the piano is filling in for what might in some other future life be a whole orchestra, being the secular world.
Thank you. So before I realized I should mention that Mark Slobin did an interview with Alicia and Donald some years ago, and it's on Digital Yiddish Theater Project online, and urge you to look at that. It's more thorough than anything I can do this morning, partly because of time and partly because I'm not Mark Slobin. It's quite a wonderful interview, and they talk a lot about how and why they do what they do. So you can fill that out, what you hear this morning. The other section that I want to ask now Alicia about is so Baruch goes to Vienna to join the theater company there, the big theater company, and he's auditioning, as it were, for the director of the theater company. I mean, he didn't know that's what he's going to do, but he finds himself auditioning. Can you talk about what happened where the score suddenly cleared out and suddenly it's just violin and it became what you call a cadenza? Can you talk about your decisions about that?
Yeah, that was actually Donnie's idea, and it was a good one. When the very first time we got together and put together the score, and we each brought some stuff we'd written, and then we kind of created new stuff together in the process of the recording. And when it came to that section, Donnie said, let's look up a speech from Hamlet, and then you play it without words. And
I forgot that.
Yeah. Actually, it was To Be or Not to Be. So I just had the text in front of me in the studio, and I tried to play the gestures, and he said, do it a little awkwardly at first, and then, find your groove and have it build until the director, who, becomes Baruch's second father in a way, the secular father, that contrasts with the rabbi father, until he bangs the table. So I listened to a bunch of cadenzas the night before we recorded.
I just have to do a quip here. It just hit me. To summarize, to be or B flat.
Wow. Bumper sticker.
Rim shot. Okay,
it's actually to be or not to be a traditional Jew. That is the question for Baruch.
Forgive me for interrupting.
It's okay.
So he banged on the table.
Yeah. So that's what I tried to do. I worked out something and Donnie said, I can write something for you, but it's going to come out better if you just make it up yourself, and it's true, because he would have written something really hard. It would have spent the next 6 years trying to play it. So I wrote something really easy.
Doesn't sound easy.
Yeah. It's easy, but not to play in tune. So that part's all right.
Actually, your pitch is amazing.
Why, thank you.
Your pitch is amazing. And when the point at which it was so striking was, I don't remember when you tuned, but you tuned, And then the lights came down in the house, and then the projection began, and then you began playing, and at a certain point, Don came in, and the pitch was exactly right. It was you were exactly on pitch with the
Thank you.
keyboard. How did you do that?
Well, that's gratifying to hear because that was my pandemic project. When I lost all my gigs for 2 years to COVID, I sat home playing scales. So practice.
Actually, I wasn't going to say anything, but I heard you playing this score in 2018, 2018. And last night I noticed that you'd moved way beyond klezmer fiddle, and you were back to your to some of the violin training, and you're way more secure technically. So you've.
Thank you for noticing that.
Well, I wasn't going to say it because it sounds like you weren't before.
No, that's like thousands of pandemic hours of etudes. And,
something good came of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've also rewritten a lot of the last hour of the film since you saw it. Yeah. We did that largely because, well, for two reasons. First, because most of it was improvised in the second half when we recorded it. And then 2 years ago, we were asked to do a show in Seattle with a clarinetist, wonderful classical clarinetist who also can play in klezmer style, was a friend of Alicia's. And so I wrote out music that she could play with us, and so it made it much more involved. And just as the accordion and the piano are trading their spaces in the film, so too the klezmer sound of the beginning of the film gives way to a much more traditionally classical formal structure when we get to Vienna. And so now there's a theme in the manner of the Austrian national anthem for Heinrich Laube, the theater director, who was a real guy, by the way. He was, I think, their director for 30 years and wrote voluminous memoirs about his work. And themes for other characters. The Archduchess's theme is Alicia's, and that comes back a few times. But a lot of the music when the other actor, Wagner, is trying to get back into the director's good graces, all of this back and forth between who's on screen, I had to work out very carefully with timings, and it's a lot of fun to play.
As Mark talked a lot about in the interview with you, there's a lot of improvisation, but there's a lot of found music, and there's a lot of composed music. Can you talk about proportions? And, for example, the klezmer-ish tunes, like the tune that introduced the shtetl, that was an original tune, wasn't it?
Yeah, all the klezmer is original. Of course, there are the prayer melodies, which obviously are not. But I'm curious from this particular audience, Mark, and maybe you in particular, did I unconsciously steal any of those tunes at the beginning? I've been wondering for years.
There's something at the beginning that is so familiar.
I know, to me too.
So I'd have to hear it again. But I love how you put it in the song. Just so points.
Thank you. The two melodies that I wonder about are dun 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 dun. That's one, and the other one dun 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 dun. Or are they just like, klezmer stuff in my head that I recombined? Okay, but I'm really glad that you didn't say, yeah, totally. You got to play royalties on that one. That was, the he's so fine of the klezmer world. Musicians worry about this stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my wife, who's a singer, and I are always listening to film scores and thinking, how could they incorporate that little lick from West Side Story into this? You know, isn't anybody listening to what's going on?
Yeah.
You know, I can't remember in 2018, but I have also since seen the recorded version that you did somewhere. So it's probably about 2 years old. Is that right? You sent me
This film?
of this film. Yeah.
I'm not sure which one we sent. We
We have many
recorded
live
all.
recordings.
Okay.
Maybe the one in Gothenburg
Yeah.
2 years ago.
You sent me a Vimeo link, and so I, you know, paid very close attention to the film so that I last night wouldn't have to watch the films, but I could listen to you.
Yeah.
And in that one, you used, besides Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto, the slow movement, you also used the B-flat piano trio of Schubert, the slow movement of that, a great deal. And last night, there was not very much of the piano trio, but suddenly there's the Trout Quintet. So how do you how does that kind of thing evolve, where the found objects get discarded and you bring in more stuff?
Well, if you listened again, you might catch that slow movement of the Schubert B-flat piano trio recurs a lot, but converted into minor or some dissonant thing, or it weaves in and out kind of subtly. It's easy to miss. It's sort of a, you know.
Can I talk about my conceit about how Schubert and klezmer are related?
No, Don.
No. So my feeling, my justification for, is this on? For including the Trout and the trio were that Schubert spent his time in cafes where there was klezmer music. So he's listening to them playing. He says, "Oh, that would make such a nice last movement for my Trout Quintet." So that becomes Baruch's theme when he is morphing into this Viennese actor and shedding his Jewish identity along with his payas. And similarly, the slow movement of the B flat, which if you play that in minor, it becomes Jewish. So why isn't Beethoven's Fifth Jewish to begin with? I don't know. So maybe it was.
It needs an augmented second.
Yeah, actually, we were originally scheduled to be in Royce Hall, and the first time I ever heard the Beethoven Fourth Piano Concerto was in Royce Hall.
Oh.
And it was Rudolf Serkin, and I was spellbound. I was spellbound. And so that movement has always been very special for me. And when I heard you doing it in this,
that was another late edition. It's not on our recording, although we're going to re-record this and maybe re-release it with the film. But at some point in our travels, it occurred to me that the juxtaposition of the theater and then the isolation of Baruch in his dressing room would be a nice visual complement for how the orchestra is introducing bom, ba-dum, ba-dum, bom, ba-dum, ba-dum, and then suddenly you hear the solo piano in a very intimate way. So I made a way of finagling those back and forth passages in the score, and then they're interrupted by going back to Yom Kippur in the middle of all of that. So we have some key, try to get from D minor back to E minor, and then the end of the movement nicely fits in with Hamlet's death and a little bit of the last movement. Bum, ba-da-dum, when he gets up and says, "How am I doing? How am I doing?"
yeah, oh, that was wonderful. So, was there anything that you think that you're fearful that I'm not going to ask you that you really want to talk about that I haven't brought, you know?
Oh, We could do our commercial pitches for a captive audience.
Well, oh, sure. I mean,
Bring us to your university.
Yeah, yeah.
We have foundation support, makes it very easy, affordable. I have a new album coming out in June called Fiddle a Fire. It's my first like real traditional klezmer fiddle album in like 30 years or something. In between, I did a lot of kind of fusion stuff. We have our DVDs for sale, if anybody wants to buy them. That's it. End of infomercial.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't mean we're necessarily wrapping up. I just was suddenly having a complete writer's block here, and
should we open it up to questions?
That's what we should do.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes.
Thank you for such a stunning performance yesterday. I was really struck by the flip-flops between diegetic and non-diegetic, the source music and the underscore. There were times where, we were matching up with what was on screen, like the changing of the guard, and then there were times like the tuning of the orchestra that kind of came across to the audience like almost like a special effect. It was a really big audience reaction to that. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process figuring out, okay, when are we going to, be source music, when are we not?
My feeling is if there's music on screen, then we want to honor that. There's some exceptions to that, and sometimes particularly, this is common in contemporary film, where the director or the composer will say, we're going to ignore all of the music that's in the scene, and we're just going to be postmodern and give you an idea of what is happening psychologically. But as long as there's musicians on screen, like the marching band, I thought, well, you find a Strauss march from that period and do it. So that march is March Austria from around 1863, I think. And then when they're in the ballroom and Strauss himself is conducting, that is, that is his Liebeslieder waltz. But I don't think that's what they're playing. And I've gone through IMSLP and looked at basically every single one of his waltzes, and I can't find one that has all the violin bowings like that at the beginning and then suddenly a percussion section coming in. So either it's not Strauss, or they put the percussion in just for visual effect. Don't know.
Or they filmed a couple of things and cut them together.
Could be.
Yeah, but that's a work ethic.
Right, and then the other diegetic thing is there's music. We assume there's music playing in the cafe right before the march. So we go into this little yum-pa, da-dum-pa, da-da, and then suddenly from outside, there's an intertitle that says it's the changing of the guard and there's fanfares. So now we have two things going on at once. We have the music inside the cafe and the music outside the cafe. And if I had a third hand, I'd also be playing piano in the cafe and another hand to sip my coffee while I'm doing it. So. Do you want to add anything to that?
No,
Sorry.
Well, that being said, I do like, I find it sometimes effective in a score when, for not postmodern reasons, but actually emotional reasons, maybe you see a scene of people dancing, but the music is very sad because it's either a nostalgic look at the past, or they're all about to be vaporized by an alien or whatever. But the irony of that and like the poignancy. I did that in the Yellow Ticket a little bit, actually. Not with diegetic music. Like there wasn't music in the scene. It was just a couple that was happy they were having a baby and they're hugging and they're smiling, and the music is very sad because it's foreshadowing with what's to come, or you already kind of know. Yes.
I was wondering if you used the prevalent theme of doors and windows closing and opening as a guide to when things were starting and stopping. Also opening and closing of books, clearly a theme. And so I wasn't sure if that played at all into your musical decisions.
Oh, wow.
That was
well,
great. That was
interesting.
great. Yeah.
I play the closing of the windows when he's trying to lock in Baruch. Like actually what I did with this, I do it with all of our movies actually. There's this ornament, it sounds like a sob, it's called the krachs in classical music. And its purpose is emotional, right? But also percussive. But I use it for all kinds of reasons. So I closed each window with the krachs. And then when people kiss each other, like when she tenderly kisses her mother-in-law, and I mark the kiss with that. And when he cuts off his hair, his payas, I also, when the scissor snips, it gets a krachs. So, but I hadn't noticed, all the door opening and closing. But now that you said that, that's really interesting. Bang on the table, books opening, books closing. Yeah, worlds. Oh, well, that's hilarious.
Yeah, he opens the book twice. The first time he opens it correctly, and we sort of like let that go. It's sort of dark. It's nothing. We're not making anything of it. But then when he puts the book on the desk and he opens it from the back, sometimes we get uproarious laughter. Last night it was a little muted, but we love that moment. There's so many extraordinary moments in this film. Thanks for bringing that up.
I want to follow up, Donald, on what you just said about reactions. I'm interested in just maybe sort of major takeaways, themes from audience reactions, particularly I think when there's a non, so to speak, specialist audience, but just anything that particularly surprises you, any sort of things that you've learned or concluded from how audiences tend to respond, if that's an answerable question.
The thing that surprised me anyway from the beginning was how people cry. Like a lot of people come up to us and like hug us and say that was the story of my relationship with my father, or that was the world of my grandparents, or like people who are surprised to be moved by an old film like that, right? Yeah. Right, it happens all the time. Very,
very frequently. Jewish audiences more than non-Jewish audiences go ape over this film. Sometimes, last night was a perfect example.
It's a prodigal son story.
Right.
It's like
people in Santa Cruz at the end were standing and cheering at the end in Irene's living room. So the sound was deafening, and it's just a lot of fun.
Irene is his granddaughter, his biological granddaughter.
It's a lot of fun. I think some of it is pent up energy after 2 hours and 15 minutes. I wish there were more opportunities for groggers later in the film. I think it's fun to include the audiences that way. But has anybody else told us about personal connections to the film the way Irene did? I can't remember.
Yeah,
well, you have that story from Chicago.
What was that?
The producer that you met.
That's City Without Jews.
That's City Without Jews.
Yeah.
Well, you could tell the story anyway.
Yes.
So I was wondering what your experience has been in showing this film and certain moments we had last night where people are laughing at certain moments. And sometimes we're not laughing at funny scenes, but laughing because of the genre of the film and the way in which an actor has an expression and so forth, just because it's so different than genres we may be typically used to today. But I'm just curious how you respond to that or experience that.
Is there any odd moments of laughter in this film?
Can you give me an example, Mark?
I think it was just when, the rabbi would make a particular reaction, just like the intensity of his face. Things like that.
Yeah, I don't know how much other film work Moravsky did. Does anybody know?
He was a Yiddish theater.
Yeah, he comes from the stage.
Yeah.
And I think Ernst Deutsch is a more sophisticated actor as a film actor. Somebody, who was it who mentioned us to me? I can't remember. Maybe one of you? I don't know. The fact that when at the end of Act 1, when he's been stripped of his beard and his father has rejected him, he's just sitting very quietly, holding Ahasuerus' crown in his hand and doing basically nothing, just sitting and looking. But you feel everything from that, and that's a very kind of contemporary way of acting. And so perhaps it's Dupont's direction, perhaps it's Deutsch's innate sense of what would work in that moment. You know, people who have seen lots of silent films know that there's a very wide range in acting styles, a lot of which come out of the theater to begin with, and the way hand gestures are used, and even have code or code for when the hands are down here, they mean one thing. When they're up here, they mean another thing. And up here, the emotion, the higher the emotion, the higher the hands go. And I have a friend who lives in Manchester in the UK who is an expert in decoding all of these movements from theater and film. Really, it's fascinating. And so she can look in a very specific way and say, this is what this gesture means. It's like a sign language. So when it's overdone and over dramatized, then it becomes funny to us. But then there are, of course, moments in the film of great humor.
Or a mixture. Like, I realized last night, I think, for the first time after 100 of these, the one spot I used to be uncomfortable when people would laugh was when his face changes, at the end of the film, when he's doing Don Carlos on stage, and the father's face changes in his mind's eye to his own face, the rabbi. And it's supposed to be a moment of great pathos and drama, I always thought, you know, but to contemporary audiences, it's like when you go back and look at the Star Trek episode where the hand comes out of the, you know, it's like, oh man, we're spoiled now. But last night, I looked and I realized it's supposed to also be funny because he crosses his arms, and it's a funny film throughout. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek, there's a lot of humor. So I don't think they were so naive. Like, I think that it was both.
Just about Morevsky, we're saying he's from theater. He was with the Vilner troupe, and in particular, he played Rabbi Azriel, the exorcising rabbi in the Dybbuk. I mean, he created the foundational role in Yiddish theater, but Yiddish theater was also about over-the-top acting. So he was projecting from a stage, and the camera was, of course, too close for a stage. So that's what happened. But he was also engaged by Dupont as the technical advisor on the shtetl scenes. So he was responsible for...
In this movie?
Yeah, in the Ancient Legend. He was responsible for the look of the shtetl. So.
Just as an aside, that moment of the father watching the son playing Don Carlo reminded me a little bit of and his reaction in the audience reminded me a little bit of the moment that's captured in the sort of fairly recent musical Hyman Kaplan, where they play out the Hamlet scene and you see the Yiddish theater's audience's reaction in this very visceral way that would be totally out of place in a place like the Vienna Opera or the Vienna Theater. And so sort of, I think part of that whole scene is dependent on audience awareness of how Yiddish theater audiences or the visceral quality of the audience reaction in the context of a Yiddish theater in a way that it's completely out of place in the sort of more structured theatrical avenue of the Vienna theater. So I was just thinking a lot about that. But again, your performance was so beautiful, and it was such a treat to get to see you in action and to sort of think through as you're watching all of the very careful thought that is given to every piece of aligning the musical and sonic moments in relation to the screen action. So I just can't even imagine how much time you must have both spent with this film.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So I think this is it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for trying here now. Thank you.